Hi, this is the Family Business Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping family businesses thrive. I'm your host, Russ Hayworth, and I work with family businesses to help them to navigate the highs and lows that can come with working with your family. Each week I will share insights and experiences from my own work and from other advisors from around the world. You will also hear directly from family businesses who have been kind enough to share their own stories. If you want to find out more about the show, just head over to fambizpodcast.com and you can get in touch with me there and find all our previous episodes. If you're enjoying the show, I'd be very grateful if you'd leave me a review in iTunes. It helps others to find the show and it gives me a warm fuzzy feeling in my belly. Just head over to fambizpodcast.com/iTunes and follow the link. Anyway, it's time for this week's show. Enjoy. Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Family Business Podcast. I'm joined today by a previous guest who has luckily agreed to come back on the show again and talk to us. So good morning to Ken McCracken, who is a family business consultant. Ken, welcome to the show and thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ross. Good to see you again.
And the topic of our conversation today is about how a family business might want to construct a team of trusted advisors. And we're asking the question, is the traditional model of advice fit for purpose? You have written a report on this, which we will link in the show notes. But before we get into that, perhaps for those of our audience that haven't heard you before, give a brief introduction and how you came to be doing what you're doing today.
Okay. By way of introduction, I practiced as a lawyer for about 25 years, who then found his way into the world of family business knowledge around about the mid-90s. And then I transitioned from being a lawyer to being a consultant, which I've been now for many years, and worked in different parts of the world with a variety of different families. Mm-hmm. And I get involved a bit in the teaching and education side of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be talking about advice and how family business can advise, but it's probably important to start to put that into some context around what we mean by when we're talking about advice. So we're not necessarily talking about their marketing plan, for example. It's more about the legal and accounting. Would that be fair to say?
I think for me, the work is now very much focused on how families continue to organise themselves and their relationship with the businesses that they own in order to be successful, which we will call governance. Uh-huh. And the need for any changes to that usually arises during the intergenerational transition. So all my work is around families who are thinking, how do we need to be organised to continue being successful? And often then you're dealing with the realities of that generational transfer. So my work, although I draw on law and accounting and finance and organisational development and family systems theory, it's all of that. You're really working with the entirety of the family and all their business and all their other assets to try and figure out how do we keep going forward together.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that oftentimes families don't necessarily know where to turn for that advice, because traditionally they would have conversations with their accountant, for example, and then conversations with their lawyer, and they may have a financial planner or a business coach, or there's various different areas that they can get advice from. And I think what we're going to be talking about today is whether going and having advice from your accountant, then going to see your lawyer, then going to see someone else, whether that's the best way for people to receive their advice, or whether there is an alternative where it's a bit more collaborative. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's different strokes for different folks. Folk will want to do this in ways that suit them. But I think, coming from the legal profession, I think I have a reasonably sound grasp of this, that we have a model of advising in which the dominant paradigm is specialisms. So everyone has a deep knowledge and understanding of a particular aspect of the reality of our family business clients' lives. Now, they live in a complex world in which not everything can be reduced to a series of technical problems to which there will be a specialist answer. So I think the challenge, and it's a really fascinating and interesting challenge, is how do advisors collaborate and combine their advice in service of the interests of the clients based on their reality. So we need to sort of climb, we need to continue to develop specialists because they are definitely needed. But we have to find effective ways of collaborating in our multidisciplinary team.
And that not always as common as you might expect in terms of collaboration. And a short story is that the birth of the podcast was actually out of me writing a book. I was writing a book on the challenges that family businesses face around succession, and did a lot of interviews with various experts and family businesses and professional advisors. And that sort of brought out the idea of the podcast. But during that process, the number one thing that most of the professional advisors were saying was there should be more collaboration. And there should be more of us working with other professions. It seemed as well as if a lot of those were putting the emphasis on the other professions not helping, but it didn't matter whether you spoke to an accountant or a lawyer. There was always someone, the other side's fault, if you like. But if we look at the way in which sort of you have a most trusted advisor, if you like, in terms of typically the business owner may go to their accountant as their first port of call, and there are pros and cons to that. But in context of greater collaboration, where are the opportunities there for things to perhaps be different?
Yeah, I think well, first of all, it's good to know from your own work, Russ, that the advisory community is aware of this. So let's interpret that as and there is an appetite among advisors to find an effective way to do this, which is a good start. However, personally, I have a bit of trouble with the idea of there just being one most trusted advisor. It's a term that's used often. It's, I think, perceived as a pivotal role, an influential role.
It's almost an aspiration for some, isn't it?
Yeah, we want to be in that pivotal position. And other terms are used to try and explain what it means. Some call it the conductor who directs the rest of the orchestra. Some call it, well, to use an Americanism, it's the quarterback that's sort of directing the team. There's also the term gatekeeper that is used, which is one that probably troubles me most because it does conjure up in my mind the idea of the advisor keeping the client captive and basically keeping the advisors away from the client.
Yeah.
I just think this idea of there being a particular person in that role doesn't help collaboration, because really what the clients, I think, need are the different specialisms that they need access to, and they need them to collaborate effectively. And I think the leadership of the team will be driven by the task at hand. I mean, if the clients are buying a property, they want their property advisors, but they might need them to collaborate with the tax people. If they're trying to create a legal document, they'll get the lawyers in advance, but they might need to speak to the financial advisor about the long-term planning and care. So I think the team has to figure out how to collaborate without necessarily any of them wanting to occupy this most trusted advisor position. I think I suppose it depends. Advisors have to approach that as they see fit, but there's something kind of, you say, we aspire to have that power and control over the client's lives. I just don't think that's what team advising is meant to be about. It's delivering a more effective service. And if you have to be a very small player in a team, why not accept that graciously and do your job effectively?
And I think as well, we see quite often with, again, generational transition, there's an appetite for the next generation to change the advisory team because they are seen as their parents' advisors, because they have that level of control over the business. It's not something that there's a huge amount of longevity there, because the relationship they've built is everything has to go through me, and I'm seen as the gatekeeper to everything else, and that can be disrupted.
Yeah, so I think that, if you want to make this about an individual in that position, then there's a problem of succession in the role of most trusted advisor. So it might suit the individual for the duration of their professional career, and they might think, well, that's all I'm interested in. I don't have to think about what next. But I think we could do better than that. I mean, I think if you're putting as you've just said, Russ, if the reality of the client's lives are that they will transition between generations, then the advisory community that serves them has to have a transition plan in order how to do that effectively. Because that's the reality of their client's life. It's not a transaction. It's not just a moment in time. There is a longer duration that has to be approached strategically and thought through carefully.
Yeah, and that's where a team approach can, or a collaborative approach can be advantageous to everybody involved, because it has a longer term view almost by default, because you're looking at it from different perspectives rather than just I'm let's say a 65-year-old accountant who's got a year left. Are you going to do the same job for a client or a family business in terms of transition as you would if you had other people in the team who were perhaps having a longer career ahead of them?
Yeah, I think so, and also there's the realities of commercial life. Those who are in an advisory position now have to make a living from that. That's what their motivation is. But it doesn't have to be all it is. You can do that very effectively over the duration of your professional life, but take responsibility for ensuring that the clients are going to be well served beyond the duration of your particular working life.
Yeah.
But our short-term interest is obviously part of any relationship, but it surely has not to be everything. We can do better than that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's many that want to do better than that. I mean, if there are advisors who think of nothing other than this month's income or this annual, that's fine. It's up to the customers, the clients, to choose their advisors carefully. And if they want advisors who have a genuine concern about the long-term interests of the family and their enterprise, they should ask and make inquiries of their advisors to make sure that they share that aspiration.
Yeah. And that gatekeeper role that we've been talking about can also lead to some other difficulties. And I've been in the situation where the gatekeeper has to be in every meeting, has to listen to every bit of advice. And then rather than the family say, okay, that sounds reasonable, they will immediately turn to the gatekeeper and go, does that sound right? And then, so who becomes your client? Are you
who comes?
So the gatekeeper, or are you talking to the family? And I've even had one guy who didn't want to have the meeting literally without that person sat in the room because they had that much influence. Now that could be seen as a positive from the gatekeeper's perspective because they've obviously built trust with that client. But if we're talking about stuff that is not their expertise or their specialism, then you've got to hope that they know enough about it to give a decent judgment on that.
Well, I think people who have that responsibility, it sounds, and with that comes power, have to exercise it very carefully. I think one of the kind of things we watch when working with clients is to avoid creating any dependency.
Yeah.
I mean, really, our mission in working with family businesses is help them to understand the challenges they face and help them to make better decisions so that they can get on with their lives. We're there to facilitate that. We're not there to become part of the network on a sort of permanent basis. I just would feel very uncomfortable if a client felt so dependent that they were not willing to do things independently of their advisors and make decisions and hold meetings and all that stuff.
Completely.
But maybe there's a different approach among some advisors who believe that is their role. That is how they can be helpful by being superior, being dominant, and taking control in that way. I suppose there's always going to be different styles of advising out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you touch on in the report as well is the idea of sharing best practice. And as advisors, we should be sharing that. But as a concept, do you agree with the concept of best practice? I'm doing the air commentary. It won't come across on the podcast. But best practice is another buzzword that is thrown around. But what are your views on
it? My experience has made me deeply suspicious of it. I think when I started doing this work, way back in the 90s, and you'd learned all this amazing stuff, and you were going out to clients and saying, this is kind of what you ought to do because it's best practice. And so it's quite an important sentence that you're making a normative statement about what someone ought to do that's based on a standard that's outside of their family. It's nothing to do with their family. It's something out here, research or other experience has said you should have a family constitution or a family council or something like that. Well, I suppose I had the good fortune to meet clients who were thoughtful enough and compassionate enough to say, no, we don't need that. So is that it? Is that all you can do to help?
Yeah.
We still need, we think we need help in understanding what's going on and making decisions, but those decisions have got to be based on our traditions, our values, our way of doing stuff, not measured against some external best practice, and incidentally, who decided that was best. And that's kind of rocked me back. And I used to have these rather arrogant conversations. That's a judgment on myself with clients that sort of I know better. Well, they're the ones that have run the business for 100 years. So you've got to then start afresh and say, well, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Now, it might look idiosyncratic to an outsider, and you think, how does that work? But if they've been doing that for 100 years, then it does work. And there's no point in measuring that against an external best practice and then saying, well, it could be better. You should, and this is a very patronizing term, you should professionalize. So I just sort of started to go in a different direction and believe that the task of the advisor is to try and understand the way the family like to do things so that your help is compatible with their way of doing things. It's not my position to judge if it's good or bad or anything else. If it works for them, then it works. And I think carrying around my bag of best practices and then saying, well, you're not doing it this way, where does that actually get us? I don't think it gets us very far. I think you described it as a buzzword. It's, we all probably use it in our marketing to elevate or add a sheen to our services, good marketing. But let's put it like this, the families that I work with would share that view. And in fact, some have said it's very refreshing because we're just fed up being told we're not very good.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, we are successful. So, how does that work? I mean, the classic was a family that didn't have a board of directors. Because they didn't like meeting together.
Right.
But they've run a successful business, as many families do, by staying out of each other's way. They operated in silos. So the suggestion that they should have a board and have more regular meetings and all that good stuff, which will work for several families, would definitely not work for them. And in fact, would have probably caused a lot of harm. Because the idea of them doing that would have raised their anxiety. They were imminent threat of conflict. And all the effort and time, they might have thought, well, what was the point of that? We were doing perfectly fine without it. So for them, the challenge was, can we replicate it? Can we keep doing it the way we like doing it? Rather than starting with an assumption that somehow having regular board meetings was going to be better.
I think the danger from an advisor's perspective as well, if you're taking a view of best practice is to have a board, for example, is you become shut off to the other options as well. If you're sat there in your mind and thinking, right, well, I know what best practice is because it's the buzzword and it is to have this professionalization and this governance and all of this kind of stuff, but it doesn't suit that family. You're not necessarily going to be doing the right job for the client because you're sat there thinking, I'm waiting for the opportunity to say, now's the time to have a board or now's the time to have this, and not really being present for the client.
Well, I think I would confess guilt to that in my previous life. You were waiting for the moment when you could demonstrate your expertise by talking about what you knew about. Now, that's okay, but it's not very helpful if that's not relevant to the client. So as you say, you've got to be sort of very present. I think there's probably a strand running through this as well that you've alerted me to, which is, we are under pressure to deliver as advisors, and it kind of eases that process to have answers. The answer is create a constitution. The answer is create a trust. Whatever they are, have a pension plan. So you can get to what you think is a proficient answer quicker, and believe that just getting there quickly is going to be most helpful to the client. it does take time, as you've used the phrase, to be present in the meeting, and a different set of skills. So I'm sure there will always be those who will continue to propound a best practice approach, and there'll be some of us who say, well, I'm not so sure. I'm kind of in that other camp. Maybe the minority at the moment, but gladly, a lot of the clients we work with, they shake their heads and dismay when they hear about best practice, because they say, yeah, we don't really believe it either.
Yeah, and I know of a family that I've worked with whose accountant came in and said in their pitch, we work with family businesses, you need a family constitution. And it was in their pitches that they hadn't asked any questions. It was just in there saying, you need one. It
was down in your part of the UK, Russ, I was with a family yesterday who were saying something very similar. They'd gone to a presentation about how to fund, and they're in a particular sector, and their conclusion was if they'd actually taken the advice, they'd have gone bust. Right. So, so that's their opinion. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not, but that's how quickly they had discarded what was proffered. One assumes genuinely believing that this was a good idea. So best practices, they're convenient. Some people like them. They're commoditized, and that might work. It's just making the clients believe that is actually the best way to go about it. And as you and I both know, family businesses are much more interesting than just measuring by best practice, finding the gap and offering to fill it. Yeah. They are fascinating, but you've got to develop the knowledge and the skills to enter their world and be present and effective and to be helpful. Yeah. But I think there's plenty of opportunity for more people to do that.
Completely. And I think that's where an understanding of, again, using air commas, best practice helps as a professional, is that you can see examples where certain approaches have been used in the past as part of what you do, but not as the only answer of what you do.
Yeah, families love to know how other families have done stuff. But I don't know who has the right to then daub best practice in some, and therefore presumably those who are not doing it that way are evidence of worst practice. Yeah. The difficulty is those who are apparently worst practice are doing quite fine. Yeah. So again, they must be doing something right, but don't fall into that trap of having to judge something to be better or worse. In fact, clients want to know, how do other people do this? And then we'll select or devise something that works for us, which I think is fascinating.
I completely agree. And I think one of the important aspects of advice is obviously trust, and trust in an individual, trust in an organization. It can be difficult sometimes at the early stages of a relationship to fully appreciate whether you can or cannot trust a professional. Generally, you'd know the reputation of their organization and do some research on it. But in what we're talking about in terms of a much more collaborative approach, how important is trust in that people are bringing in the right people at the right time and for the right reasons?
Well, a massive topic that, isn't it? A couple of comments. I think there's a lot around. I hear a lot around the relationship side of this. So, in the report that you mentioned, I draw on the work of another social scientist who said, look, we can divide that into broadly two categories. There are people who are generally trusting, who expect their willingness to trust others to be reciprocated and not abused. Fine. And there's others who are more suspicious, and they tend to have a circle of trust that is based on some sort of common characteristics, social, educational, kinship, members of the same club, some sort of connection that then makes them able to trust those people, but be distrustful of others who are outside that community. Well, that's fine. That's just the way you are. I think that's just, people. If folk only want to work with people they know, then they will feel confident with that, but they've restricted the potential pool in which they are trying to select advisors from. So I think the relationship side, and I suppose that's why we go out and do networking, and we join associations, and we want to enter these communities and to gain their trust, and it works for some people. It has downsides. The most obvious example being affinity fraud, where people abuse a common connection, Madoff being the primary example I give, and then they abuse that, albeit that they had got into the relationship in the first case because their clients had assumed that they could be trusted because they came from the same background. So, but I think the approaches to the relationship I try to explain that, and that's just who you are. But I'm also interested at the beginning as to the level that people trust and competence, and demonstrable expertise. Because after a conversation, I'm going to get on a flight. I don't really care whether I like the pilot or not. I just want to be able to take off and land. I want to be competent, and I assume the systems by which she's been trained and reviewed and appraised have all put in place a trustworthy system by which I can then, without knowing even who this person is, trust in their competence. And I think we do that a lot in life. I put my car in the garage. I don't know what they do, but I presume they know what they're doing, that I can trust them. So it seems odd to me, that we so promote the relationship side of things, which matters, and almost take competence for granted. It's as though people are saying, no, people who are not interested in competence, they can't kind of judge that. It's all about the personal relationship. I think the competence really does matter. And for some people, it will matter above all else. They might not even want to like their advisors; they just want to know they're doing a good job, and are the best that they can access. Clients have to make these decisions. I'm just sort of picking apart what's quite a complex thing and trying to sort of set it out, the relationship bit and the other aspects of trust, and then we can think about it and maybe mobilize it better in building effective relationships. We all come from a background. We all are who we are. We can't kind of do much about it, I suppose. But if that's the only basis upon which we can build trusting relationships, we're all going to end up working with people who are like us. I think our world is far more complex, far more vast, and it cannot be based on that. So you have to have other things upon which clients can base their trust. And I think the most obvious one would be a demonstrable competence in what you're setting out to do.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Completely agree. You talk in the report about the concept of shared purpose, and it was something that I found very interesting. So can we expand on what you mean by that, and then perhaps have a bit of a conversation around that?
Well, we are certainly not alone in this view of family businesses, but the fundamental question for any family business, and certainly one that's contemplating going forward, is why do you want to be in business with your relatives? Someone else described it, why would you opt to be in a relationship of financial interdependence with your relative? That's what being in a family business is all about. So what is the answer? And the only people that can answer that are the family. Now, thankfully, it is among the most well-researched areas of the family business knowledge and practice. And that keeps coming back and telling us that successful families prioritize their financial success, but there's invariably another set of reasons that they want to, that motivate them to be in business together. The academics call it socio-emotional wealth. Just call it non-economic reasons. So I think for the family, that's important. And for the advisors, it's important to know. And we can't provide the answer. You have to help the family figure it out for themselves. But by way of a simple example, a family that wants to build their business and sell it in 10 years has a fantastic reason for being in business together, and all their decisions and all their advice will be targeted towards achieving that outcome. A family that wants to be in business for another 100 years and pass it on through generations have a similar motivation, but I presume that the advice and help they need will be different. Now, if we as advisors don't know what the family are trying to achieve through being in business together, how do we align our advice to helping them to achieve success as they define success. And the only thing we can do then, if we are not able to grasp that, is make assumptions.
Yep.
And what are the chances of our assumptions being right? Well, I think pretty remote. And we simplify it to the kind of really base level of everyone wants to maximize return and mitigate tax.
Yeah.
Okay? The problem now is that the research says, well, that's not what we're learning from family businesses. In fact, it doesn't actually feature in the lists of why do families want to be in business together. So in a sense, we're challenged to say if that's the kind of, maybe I'm being a bit simplistic about it, but if that's the assumption upon which we base our advice, we now know from research, and plenty of it, that it's wrong. If you work with a family and you find out why they want to be in business together, and you can then understand it, you can then, as an advisor, do some incredibly thoughtful, helpful, and creative work for that family, and the next one will be different, and the one after that will be different. How interesting is that?
Yeah,
Instead of assuming that all these families have the same set of motivations, you find out what they're actually all about, and then you align your advice towards achieving their goals. I just think that adds a lot more variety and colour to being an advisor.
Absolutely, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about best practice. Because if you're going in there with a set of assumptions that everybody wants to save tax, everybody wants to maximise profits for a business sale, for example, then the best practice solution for that is what's going to be top of your mind, rather than actually taking the time and effort to understand why the family is in business together, what their shared purpose is, and aligning your advice to that.
Yes, and I think if there is to be a collaborative team of advisors, they all have to understand it. They all have to respect it. Why do I say that? Well, I do feel it's not our role as advisors to judge or have an opinion about why our families are in business. It's to understand and then make sure that what we do is going to help them. If you ever come across an advisor whose motivation for being in business you find unacceptable or whatever, don't work for them. But the worst situation I would have to say is we make assumptions as advisors, which is making a decision to remain ignorant, and then we provide the client with advice. And if the client doesn't take that advice, the advisor might say, well, I don't understand why they didn't take that advice. That's a kind of routine. You could go down another path and say, I wonder why they're in business. I need to understand this. We then need to figure out what we can do. And you just start down a different road altogether. I'm pretty relaxed about it. I think you just have to say from the advisor's perspective and the family's perspective, there's a choice. And it may take a bit longer to figure out why you're in business and what's the shared purpose and all of that, but there's a far richer outcome for the clients by doing that. And I think a far more fascinating set of challenges for advisors.
Completely. And taking the example of the assumption that everybody wants to save tax, if that's not if there's a broader goal that means you incur more tax, it's just making sure that the family are aware that that's the implications of what they're saying as their purpose. And they make their decision based on that. Absolutely. It's not for us to say, well, you can't do that because you have to save this tax here, because that's how I'm doing my job. I get measured on how much tax I save you. It goes beyond that, and it's aligning the advice entirely with the shared purpose should be how advisors feel rewarded, rather than I've saved them X amount of tax, as an example.
I think so. I think, and there's plenty other I think other examples of the same kind of model, but it's all. I mean, I think it's just fascinating. I think do advisors feel competent in making assumptions that they know what their clients want before they've actually had a conversation that starts with, well, why do you want to be in business with your family? So, I mean, even taking this to an extreme, if you ask the question and somebody says, well, the answer is, I don't. Well, the advisory route then has to be, how do we separate this family's interests at the least emotional and financial cost? Where we'd assumed that their assumption that they wanted to continue and the goal was to preserve wealth, we create structures around their lives that tie them together into what a life of which could turn out to be relatively miserable.
Yeah.
And the fault in that process is somewhere early on in the relationship, the conversation that needed to be had was not had. The client didn't volunteer, but nor did the advisor inquire, why do you want to be in business with your family? And if the answer is, well, do you know what, I don't really, then that would have started a whole set of advisory challenges which had never seen the light of day, because everyone assumed continuity, preservation, tax mitigation, all that good stuff was de facto always going to be the answer. I think it's challenging, but as I keep saying, it's really interesting.
That is interesting, isn't it? And that brings me on to my next question. In terms of, I mean, we're perhaps slightly biased because we work with family businesses, but in terms of family businesses seeking advice, should they seek out people who have an understanding of family businesses? And I guess it's difficult to quantify an understanding of family business, because somebody could work with family businesses and not know anything about family systems and systems theory and things like that. And we're not suggesting that has to be the benchmark for advisors, but how important is it that there is an understanding of things like family dynamics when looking for and giving advice?
I think the answer is pretty obvious, but if you've reshaped your question, Russ, and said, if you were wanting to enter the world of private equity, okay, take any example, but let's just take private equity. You'd kind of want to know the advisor was in the private equity world, that they knew whatever goes on in that world, where the sources of finance were, what the negotiating tactics were, the upsides, the downsides, the legal agreements, the blah, 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 blah. So you'd want to know that they knew about that. So if you're going into the family business world, it seems obvious that you would say, how well equipped are my advisors with the knowledge that is up to date and contemporary around that field? Now, the great news for the clients and the advisors is there's plenty of it now. It's accessible, and there's no reason to not know that stuff. And I think those who want to provide a superior service to their clients from the advisory side will seek it out. And some will then become expert lawyers and accountants and bankers and pension advisors, because they see dimensions of every challenge with the additional knowledge and expertise that they have. Now, I think from the family side, they're getting access to a lot of this through family business associations and conferences and literature and so forth. So I think the challenge is now that if I could put it this way, the demand side from the customer is getting more sophisticated, and the supply side has got to match up. So for every advisor, working for a lot of family businesses over years, I'm sure does build up a reservoir of experience, but the world is now much beyond that. And I think it's reasonable for clients to say, what have you invested in terms of developing your expertise around family businesses and what's happening in the world? And for the advisory firms, there's a choice. If you want to be in the family business space, then invest in training and development of staff to make sure that they are expert at doing that. If you don't. It's just a commercial choice as to how you allocate your training budget. But there's definitely much, much more now, and in the space than just your professional specialism combined with a bit of experience or inherited wisdom from your mentors. And I think the customers know that, and they're expecting a better standard.
And I think I'm not going to name names, but I was with a lawyer. I was with a lawyer last week, and I mentioned that I specialise in working with family businesses, and his response was, "A business is a business, isn't it?" And you kind of go, right, okay, you would expect, or I would expect, perhaps again from a biased perspective, that there would be an understanding that there is a difference with when people work with their family. And as soon as I started to explain some of the nuances that can come with it, it's like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. And then it was at a subconscious level that there was that understanding, but it wasn't something that he would go in and have any different approach to working with.
Yeah, and I think there's well, that just denies reality now.
Completely.
And it denies, decades of knowledge and research, which says the defining characteristic of this commercial enterprise is the presence of a family and the interactions that then happen. Okay, you can choose to deny reality, but the conventional wisdom is probably still every business should be treated like a business. Okay, fine. I just think we're almost at a stage where we could say, maybe I'm slightly ahead here, but that is bound to fail because the families know it's not. And they're now learning it's not. And they're talking to other families who say, no, it's all about the interconnected reality of our lives. You really need to get your hands around this. Good news is there's a lot of knowledge out there. There's some advisors who are trying to do that. Make sure you choose the ones that know what they're doing. Like you would if you were doing anything else in choosing advisors. And those who want to cleave to the old idea that every business is a business, I'm sure it will sustain them for a while, but I think we're moving in a direction where eventually the families will seek out advisors who are doing better than that.
I agree. And again, that brings us nicely on to the alternative to what we've been describing as there being a gatekeeper and there being a particular specialist that holds the key to the relationship. What sort of approach would you be looking for from a team of professional advisors in terms of delivering a great outcome for the family business?
Yeah, I think it takes us back, Russ, to earlier in this conversation where you referenced or mentioned advisors sort of talking about this. We need to do this. And I've had plenty of conversations like that too, within organisations for whom I've worked and among representatives from different organisations who all work for the same client. So that's the good news. Your question is, well, what do we do about it? Well, that gets more difficult. However, what I did was look at how other high-performing teams function. If you're having an operation, you're surrounded by a high-performing team. We've got orchestras, we've got sports teams, and so there's tons of literature out there about high-performing teams. And I thought, well, so there's nothing new in that. Is how do you apply it to a team of advisors from different organizations who are having to collaborate in serving the same client? And the things that you learn, I think would be the team has a very clear common purpose: win the game, save the patient, whatever it is, get people out the building that's on fire. Then I said, well, for advisors working for families, that has to be what we've talked about, is the shared purpose. Why is that family in business? We all have to understand it. We all have to respect it. And then we have to, as a team, say, what do we do about it? Well, then the team breaks down that into a series of tasks and who is doing what on the team. And in doing that, they resolve any territorial disputes among organisations where both could provide a particular service, but for the purpose of being in this team, they're not going to waste their time competing with each other. They're going to say, well, there's how this team has to be assembled, and well, I could do that work on this occasion, you're doing that work, but I'm not going to then try and undermine you, because in doing that, I'm undermining the team. So we kind of agree what our boundaries are, and then you just keep following the kind of logic of what seems to be the literature and teams functioning. For example, team incentives. Now we talked about team bonuses in industries. There's lots of that. So why doesn't that apply to a team of advisors? If the team performs well, should the team receive a financial incentive? Rather than every individual member in the team only being concerned about their own income, commission and fees or whatever, they're actually interested in the performance of the overall team because they have an incentive to make sure that the team delivers in the way that it's undertaken to do so. The team will have to trust each other to operate in that way. And
which is easier said than done in some respects, isn't it? Because it's the again, in the interview process for the book, it was it became apparent that there was a reluctance in some respects because it was felt the other professionals would kind of check up on them and cut across their advice and go, well, yeah, you could do that, or and undermine them a little bit, and therefore it's easier not to expose yourself to that danger of being undermined than it is to actually work with somebody and build that trust over time, but because it's the right thing to do for
But then
the
you're
client.
saying, well, are you saying the problem is that advisors can't trust each other?
I think sometimes a particular chat I had brought this home is that there was almost a reluctance to be scrutinised by somebody else in the professional space in case it cut across what they were trying to achieve. But that goes back to that shared purpose and the best practice. It's kind of the counter argument to that is if you're going in with a mindset of my advice is the only advice that really matters and really counts, you're going to shut the doors off to any other form of advice there, which we're, I think, arguing that is probably the wrong thing to do for the
because
client.
I mean that doesn't sound very team-like, because teams. No. I mean, there may be people who believe. I think this would be reasonable, that the best type of team is made up of individuals each pursuing their own selfish interest, and that will work itself out, and you'll get the optimum performance from the team. The alternative is that the team has to figure out how to collaborate and work together to get the best performance out of the team. So at that level, advisors have to be willing to trust each other to act in the best interests of the team, and not to pursue their self-interest to the disadvantage of another team member. It requires people who are concerned about team performance to speak up. If there's an advisor that's not delivering, then they should be held accountable. Completely. And if there's a team bonus, there's a real snap to that accountability, because that person's performance might be undermining the team getting the bonus.
Yeah.
I also suggest in the report I wrote that if there's difficulty with this, which I think there is, I mean, I'm very, very practical about it, then why don't we take the advice we give to our clients, our family business clients, which is write it down. And we say, well, you mentioned earlier, have a family constitution, so we write it down and we make it very clear and everyone understands the rules, and this is what ownership means and this is what the family council does, blah, blah, blah. Well, why can't we have a family advisor's constitution that says, to be part of this, to have the opportunity to work with this family, you have to abide by the following protocols or guidelines or codes of conduct in regard to your conduct. And failure to do so would eventually lead to you being removed from the team. Teams have to share information. I think clients get a bit frustrated about having to tell the same things over and over again to different advisors. I told him that, can you not? No, we don't share information. Doesn't sound very team-like to me. So I think the challenge, I don't think any of that strikes me as innovative, because it's kind of almost bog standard in the literature about teams. What seems to be challenging is how do we apply that to the advisory community who, and I'm part of that, have become used to working in isolation, each doing our own thing to a high standard of professionalism, wanting to get paid often as much as possible as we can negotiate, and that's all we're interested in. Well, that's not team advising. That's assuming that the client having a series of bilateral relationship with advisors who have that motivation can somehow accumulate into fantastic cohesive advice. I think that's now being challenged, that the advisors need clients who are willing, clients need advisors who are willing to collaborate. And that brings the challenges for the advisors. Are you willing to share information? Are you willing to share reward? Are you willing to do what's in the best interest of the team, even if it is not in your self-interest?
And I think as well, there's an alternative to that, as I see, is if there's a reluctance from the client to have their accountant, lawyer, financial planner all in the same room at the same time, is because each of those advisors is potentially on the clock and they're paying 3 times the hourly rate to have that person sat in front of them when the meeting may be focused on the legal aspects of something. Whereas having a team approach where it's agreed who's best placed to go in and deliver that bit and to go in and run those conversations kind of takes that off the table a little bit, because you're not sat there, for example, paying your accountant 3 hours pay for him to say 6 words.
Yeah, I think so, because if the team is functioning well and they've decided their respective tasks and they respect the boundaries around that, then the client says, I need to do this. So they go to who would be the lead advisor for the team on that. And they assume that advisor can then phone up the other people on the team and say, right, they've asked us to do this. Can you do this bit for me? And the other team member will say, of course I will. Because there was another occasion when that team member was in the leadership position and had made the same call to the other advisor and said, I'm now in charge of this team. Can you do this bit for me?
Yeah.
And it is a different working relationship, and it's challenging because that's not how we're used to doing things, and that's not how most organizations with advisors measure their performance. So we really go back deeply into the advisory organizations and say, to really deliver a team-based model, we have to kind of reconfigure quite a lot, attitudinally, contractually, how we rate and measure performance.
Yeah.
And that makes it very challenging. But not if it's imaginable, it's doable. Someone's going to eventually say, yeah, we can do that.
And I think as well, there's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy with it, in terms of, if you can find people who are like-minded, who believe in collaboration, who believe in very client-centric outcomes, then by bringing those people together, the outcome from that should be far more positive than individual, perhaps egotistic people saying, no, I'm the lead advisor, I'm the gatekeeper. It's logical that should be a better outcome for everybody, I think.
Well, I would say it's a better outcome for people that want to work in that way. Now, if people believe, as you refer to it, as we're all individuals driven by ego and wanting to maximize their own reward or whatever, those who like that should continue doing it. I wouldn't want them to change, because that would be impossible.
Yeah.
But we need to make it possible for those who would like to approach advising in a different way, to find a model for collaboration. Not just there's plenty of desire. We need to get down to the practicalities. Like, how do you share information in between professions? How do you navigate our professional guidelines? And how do we do it in a way that is acceptable to the clients from a service perspective, from a cost perspective? Is there a technological aspect to this in terms of storage and accessibility of information and security issues? And, that's an interesting challenge. But for those who think that's not the way to go, then good on them. They should stick to their model. But those of us who believe it need to start having conversations like this more often and figuring out how we do it.
And then the market will decide, won't it?
Yeah, the market will decide.
In terms of if there's a demand for it. If there's a demand and no supply, then the consumer becomes frustrated. And if there is no demand for it and somebody creates it, then
and some might say, well, wait for the demand. There is no demand among customers for that at the moment. But if you want to wait until the demand is there, you might have missed the opportunity. Because the opportunity for a lot of this in a very disrupted market for professional advice is to see things differently, to try to create different business models underpinned by technology where possible, and deliver an alternative service. And then, yes, you're absolutely right, the customer is going to decide.
Because wasn't it, I may be misquoting, but was it Henry Ford that said if you asked people what they wanted, it would have been faster horses or something?
Exactly. Nobody would have described a motor vehicle. We're maybe at one of those inflection points where the advisors from their position, which has some objectivity and knowledge and experience, should be thinking, can we do this better? And if so, how so? Not waiting for the clients to come up and say, we've figured it out, can you do it this way? So I do think the way I see this is the interest. I'd stop short of saying demand, but the interest is built from families becoming better educated and informed about their own realities. That's knowledge. So they're still looking at advisors and say, can you do something about this? So the advisors have caught up and now we're thinking, yeah, we can, but can we do it better? And if so, we need to develop new models of advising, new organisational structures to do that.
Yeah.
And given the size of the family business market, that's there. You have to decide: is that an opportunity for advisors? You don't have to get 100% correct. You could, service 1% of the UK family business market and still be very successful.
Yeah.
So is the risk reward equation right to make the investment of time and training and kind of innovation because the scale of the market justifies taking the risk?
Yeah. And if you look at just the world we live in now, I mean, we are able as individuals to go to the internet, to stick something into a search engine and find stuff. So the accessibility of information is much more widespread now and far easier to get hold of. And that is shaping how people consume services, because they're able to find out an awful lot more about things before they then get in touch with their professional advisors. So that's, as an advisory community, we need to understand and adapt to that, rather than think, well, I'll just keep to the traditional, I'm the gatekeeper, my role's safe. And
yeah, I think absolutely correct. And I think we all have to just accept that. I understand in some parts of the world you could now get a medical diagnosis online. You don't have to see a doctor. So there is no, and maybe that would be better if you saw a doctor, but it's satisfactory without that human intervention. Maybe you and I will find very soon that clients will want an online version of a consulting engagement. They don't want to pay for expensive consultants. Value for money consultants.
Reassuringly expensive.
Reassuring. But they want to go online, they want the information, they want to DIY a solution. So who's going to provide that? So these are, challenges for, if advisors just want to say that will never affect me, then that's fine. There's been plenty of other sectors. I'm sure we're seeing travel agency, opticians and so forth. I've said that before, and it's kind of happened. So I'm a fatalist. I think it will happen to our profession. So the question is what we're going to do about it, and be on the front foot rather than waiting for the demand to wash us away.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to look at firms like Blockbuster, and I mean, Kodak invented digital photography, didn't they? And
I'm old enough to remember going out to hire videos of a Friday night. So now that's just not happening. So I think that's progress, and progress is very challenging and very unsettling in some respects, and incredibly exciting in others. So the conversation that we're having here is saying, look, advisors have got access to fantastic knowledge out there now if they want to get it. That's just a commercial choice. You either do or you don't. If you do, then you start to think these thoughts about, hang on, we could be doing a better service, providing a better service for clients. And even if we could collaborate with other advisors who have the same mentality and approach, we could do an even better service. So then you're compelled to say, well, how do we do that? Which I think takes you into completely new territories, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And exciting ones.
Well, if we take the example of Blockbuster and going along on a Friday night and renting a video for 3 days and having to post it back through the letterbox when you were late, we were all relatively happy with that. That was something that we were happy with until something better came along. Until Netflix or Amazon Prime or Apple TV were there, and we thought, actually, that's far more convenient. That's what I want. And then the consumer demand shifted to something that is far more aligned to how we live our lives. And I can see that happening in the advisory space, where traditionally it has been you go and see a professional advisor rather than a team. And actually thinking about it, there is a better way to be able to deliver that advice. And if it's created and it does work, then that's going to be the direction of travel.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. That seems inevitable, doesn't it? It's just a march of events. I think I come from the advisory community, so I feel I can, and I've sort of stepped out a bit. I look back and I combine all that experience, and we are innately conservative, and sometimes for very good reasons. There is knowledge, there's traditions, there's values, there's practices which the professions try to sustain, and they have to do that in face of the challenge that they have from technology. But we can keep the best of what the professions stand for and embrace the need to do things in a different way, and like multidisciplinary firms working together, members of whom are subject to different professional regimes because of the profession of which they are individual members. We just need to kind of figure out how to do that, and there will be a way. There will be.
Yep. Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll live long enough to see it, Russell.
Absolutely. We're ending the show now with our usual, I'd say quick fire question. Not quick fire at all. If you had one tip to pass on to family business, bear in mind this is your second show, so it has to be a different tip from last time.
Right.
If you had one tip to pass on to family businesses, perhaps around this area, what would it be?
Well, the thing that's front of mind, and I hope it's not the same as the last time, but based on our conversation, is go to advisors who have a demonstrable knowledge and competence about family business. The same way you take your car to somebody that's demonstrable competence in servicing your particular make of car, I'd say do the same with your advisors. There are, I would now say, plenty who are making a commitment to this field. They're learning. They're developing new services. Go and find them. And to those advisors, market yourself as having that. Probably they still represent the minority, so you might have to look hard. But I think given the importance that advice can have for the family and for their business and all manner of other things, I think that's worth the effort.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Where can our audience find out more about the report and about you and the work you do?
Well, the report is published by Globe Law and Business. So that's globelawandbusiness.com. They publish a whole lot of that, of other titles too. I can be contacted by email. I've not yet got to creating a website or anything like that. So, but I'm on LinkedIn, and the email is ken@m-fbc.com.
Fantastic. And once again, thank you for your time and your insights. We'll link everything up in the show notes so people can get in touch through there.
Good.
And hopefully we finish in time for you to go and catch your flight.
Well, thank you, Russ. It's always a pleasure having a discussion with you. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
I hope you found this episode useful. If you have, then why not share it with your family and see what they think? I work with families just like yours to help them to better understand the complexities that can come with being a family in business. So whether you're just starting out or heading into the umpteenth generation, if you feel that I could help, check out fambizpodcast.com/work with Russ and get in touch. Until next time, take care.